Hi, everyone. This is Marc Bates, and this is the Rabbit Room Apologetics YouTube channel. So, today's going to be a little bit different. First of all, today is going to be published on December 26th at 5 p.m. And I hope everyone had a good Christmas break. We had two little videos I had done ahead of time on the 24th and 25th, where I restated have a Merry Christmas and that I am not opposed to Christmas. Some people think I am. I'm not. But I like to be academically sound in my reasoning and my logic and what I look at Bible. And I gave 3 videos before this where I was talking about how Christmas is not Christ's birthday. It's the day when the church has decided, for many reasons, not paganism, okay, not absorbing a pagan ritual, but for many reasons chose December 25th as a date to celebrate Christ's birth. Their logic was wrong, their reasoning was wrong, okay? It was first century Greek interpretation. So that's why it's important for us to know when it really happened, because there are many prophecies that are tied to the date of Christ's birth that many people don't really know that well. And so if you know when Christ was really born, potentially, right? I'm not going to claim that I know the exact date, though I have really good a preponderance of evidence on that date. There are reasons why this is something that we should know about. I've got nothing wrong with Christmas. I celebrate it with my family and my church, and we have a great time. It's not Christ's birthday. It's a day we want to celebrate the coming of the man God into this world to provide salvation for us. Okay? I love Christmas. I love the music. I'm a musician. Playing Christmas music is lots of fun. So I'm not anti-Christmas. I'm just making sure we know what the date really is and what the celebration of Christmas really is about. Okay, right? So with all that being said, now that we're after Christmas, I did 3 videos and they got some interesting responses. So the first video I did was on December 3rd. And that was the real birthday to Christ, Michael Heiser, surprising, right? And so right there, I'm telling you where I'm getting most of the information in this video is from Dr. Michael Heiser, who was one of my teachers. I spent a great many years studying under him. So, hats off to anyone who watched that video because of Michael Heiser's name. He's a wonderful scholar. He never claims to be perfect. I'm not perfect, right? And just like Dr. Michael Heiser, I will agree with him. I get most of my information by stealing it from other great authors and scholars. And so, right, there's nothing new under the sun here. So on that one, we talk about September birth date on 3 BC. And there really were 2 main things I was getting as replies to this one. One was that Herod died in 4 BC, so obviously the birth of Christ had to be before 4 BC. And that was the scholarly consensus. And I even mentioned this in the video, that the old scholarly consensus was based on a misreading of Josephus. That's really about the only place they get it from, that Herod died in 4 BC. And there are quite a bit of evidences that point to a later date for Herod's death, which was 1 BC. Plus the fact that there are many things in the gospel story itself that just can't happen effectively with Herod being dead by 4 BC. So you add all that up, the preponderance of the evidence points to Herod's death being later. 1 BC is a great time for that. It fits with the biblical narrative. It fits with all the evidence. It fits with the numismatic evidence, right? Coins that were printed, and coins are one of the great archaeological things that we look for a lot of our stuff. So once again, the new consensus essentially is 1 BC. So anyone who tells me I'm wrong, it's 4 BC because that was the scholarly consensus. That was the old scholarly consensus. Just because it was the consensus doesn't mean it was right, right? We've got new evidence that points to 1 BC. So we're going to go with that date in my book. Okay, the second thing, which I thought was really interesting, was I had a couple people tell me that Revelation 12 was not a prophecy of Jesus' birth. Okay, so let's understand what a prophecy is. A prophecy is an utterance by a prophet or an apostle, or obviously Jesus Christ himself as the man God, right, of a future event. A prophecy is something that's going to happen in the future. It's not something that has already happened. You don't need to prophesy something that has already happened. Now, what do we know about John, the author of Revelation? Well, first of all, most scholars will accept that John, the beloved disciple, was the author of Revelation. That was the consensus of the early church fathers. He does kind of self-identify himself in Revelation, right? So we'll use that consensus as a good preponderance of evidence argument that it was John, right? Now, what do we know about John? Well, first of all, we do know that John, by tradition and by biblical accounts, right, he was a relative of Christ. More than likely, he was a cousin, and his mother, Salome, right, was a sister of Mary, okay, the mother of Jesus. So that would make him a cousin. He definitely had some inkling of when Christ was born, or when Jesus was born, because it's family stuff, right? It was a relatively small town. They all know when things happen, and he's a relative, right? So he wouldn't be writing a prophecy about something that had already occurred. The other thing we know about John was that he was well versed, based on his writings, in the Jewish thought of the day, which was centered around the Bible, centered around the Hebrew Bible, centered around the writings that you would find in the apocryphal books, right? And the pseudepigrapha books. Now, we're not saying that these are books that are canonical. They're not in the canon, so to speak, which means that they are not considered to be without error, right? But they were certainly books that told us a lot about the way people thought in the Second Temple period. And so he would have known these books, and he would have known these writings, and he would have known the discussions. The other thing that you may not appreciate very well is that he was a fisherman initially, right? His father Zebedee and his family was a pretty well off, by all accounts, fishing family. Well, fishermen know how to read the stars, right? It tells them a lot because they're out fishing at night typically, and you have the stars, and they know the stars. And reading the stars as a way of seeing the signs given by God for what's happening on Earth. This is not astrology, right? We're not reading that Scorpio is, right? God put the stars up there as signs. He says that to us many times. And the one thing, once again, you got to go back to a first century or earlier Hebrew texts. All the stars had names, right? Now, they didn't know them as stars. They thought they were something else up in the firmament, but they all had names. And when you take the names for the 12 constellations that make up what we would call the zodiac, but it's really just the 12 constellations that everyone sees at basically the same time every year, right? So that's how you can use them to tell time, what month you're in. They tell a story, and the story is essentially the story of God's creation and salvation. And everything that resides around what would be the virgin, Virgo, right, is talking about the birth, how the virgin gives birth to a child who crushes the serpent, right, and brings salvation to mankind. John would have been well familiar with this, as most first century Jews would have been, right? And he knew well, and he should have known. Let me be careful. He should have known that the sign in Revelation 12 that he quoted from, well, not an exclusive sign in the sense that does Virgo have the 3 stars, 3 of up to 5 stars under her feet? Does the dragon appear below, right? Drago. Well, those would be well-known signs. And anyone who was into reading the stars a little bit, right? Stargazers, they would have known that this was not a very common occurrence. So when John is telling us these things, I'm interpreting here a little bit. The text doesn't tell us this explicitly. I think John knows full well that that was a sign in the stars placed there by God that would talk about the birth of the man God, right? And how the man God would bring salvation, and that it was timed when all these things would occur that John talked about in Revelation 12, and that time frame only occurred in John's lifetime once, and that was in 3 BC. He could have looked that up, because we have records from the Second Temple period where they kept star charts, and they were looking when things were occurring, because, once again, not that they were practicing astrology, right? They're not trying to predict your life from what's happening in the stars. What they're trying to do is see God said the stars are placed there as a sign, and they're looking at that to see how these things line up with the biblical texts. Okay? So, John would have done that. So, it's not a prophecy. It's a proof text that Jesus Christ, Jesus, right, was born. He was born when John said he was born, when the gospel said he was born within what would be the first century, give or take a year or two, right? Calendars get really mixed up back in those days, but it was all foretold. And that's what John was saying in Revelation, that this has already occurred. So, hope that helps talking about that one. In the next video, I'll talk about the prophetic case, which was another video I did, and then the one that got all the attention, the one where I'm talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. So look for those coming up very shortly. Thank you.